Good morning. Today is Monday, September 9th, 2024. Lo yavo Ammoni u'Moavi b'kal Hashem. A person who is from the nation of Ammon or the nation of Moab is not allowed to marry within the Jewish people. Gam dor asiri, even the 10th generation. That means even the 10th generation after they convert to Judaism. So a person from Ammon or Moab is allowed to convert to Judaism, but they're just not allowed to marry another Jewish person. They could marry a person from their own people, but they're not allowed to marry within the Jewish people. Lo yavo lehem b'kal Hashem ad olam. They're never allowed to intermarry within the Jewish people. Why? This week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Teitzei. Al dvar asher lo kidmu eschem belechem u'b'mayim, because they did not come out to greet you, to offer you bread and water, b'derech b'tzeischem mimitzrayim, when you were traveling through the desert after you had left Egypt. Because remember, Ammon and Moab are the descendants of our cousins. They are descendants of Lot, the nephew of Avraham. And so they should have offered us a little hospitality. Your cousin comes by, you're in the desert, he's hungry, he's thirsty. You can't even offer him a little bit of water, a piece of bread. It shows very, very bad midos, bad character traits that are ingrained over generations. So that's one thing. And then the next thing is, not only that, V'asher sochar alechas bilam ben ba'ar mipsar arayim mipsar aram narayim l'kaleka. And they didn't only offer hospitality, they actively tried to harm us. They hired Bilam, remember the story? Aviva, I'm not going to mention the donkey. I'm just going to talk about Bilam. To hire Bilam to curse us. And again, our cousins. That's how you act to a member of your extended family after generations and generations. And the Torah continues. But Hashem did not listen to Bilam and his attempts to curse the Jewish people. But Hashem transformed what Bilam wanted to say, which was a curse against the Jewish people. God made it happen that it came out as a blessing. And we know that blessing, the famous blessing. Matovu alecha Yaakov, the famous blessing that Bilam, against his will, gave to us. And why did Hashem change that plan? Ki ahevcha Hashem elokecha, because Hashem loves you. So again, two practical points. The first one I mentioned. They're allowed to convert, people from Ammon and Moab, they're allowed to convert to Judaism. They can become Jews, but they can't marry other Jewish people. So this is not about, this prohibition here is not about religion, it's about marriage. It's about families. And we've discussed this many times before. Marriage and families requires, in order for it to be successful, requires good midos, good personality traits. Looking out for your family. Not trying to curse people. And therefore, this people has demonstrated over generations, not just one individual, but over generations. And so Hashem says, this group of people cannot marry into the Jewish people. Now, the other practical point to keep in mind is that for more than 2,000 years, this prohibition has been moot. It does not apply because in ancient times, it already happened that the ancient nations of the world were moved around. And therefore, it is not possible, it has not been possible for 2,000 years, and it is not possible today to identify any person with any of the ancient nations that are mentioned in the Torah. So we don't know who is a Mitzri, a person who lives in Egypt. I know we use the English word Egyptian when we talk about Pesach. Those are not the people living in Egypt today. That's not who we're talking about. When we talk about Amalek, we do not have any identification of who is a person from Amalek. And the same thing with Ammon and Moab and the Canaanim and the Chittim and all the other ancient nations, and whatever rules apply to them in the Torah, they're all moot because we don't know, we're not able to identify anybody. Okay, fine. But even though it is not something that is practically applicable to us, there is a deep lesson here. And that's due to something that is very curious about this passage. One more time. Lo yava Ammoni and Moavi b'kal Hashem. Even if a person from Moab or Ammon converts to Judaism, they could be a religious Jew, they could be keeping Shabbos, all these things, still, they can't marry within the Jewish people. Why? Two reasons. One, because they didn't offer you bread and water when you were traveling through the desert. And the second is because they hired Bilam to curse you. Now, if you had asked me, I would say, okay, that should be the end of the passage. Here we're talking about these events, not offering bread and water, hiring Bilam. Remember, we learned about this in the Torah earlier in the book of Bamidbar. Here, we're not really interested in the book of Devarim. We're not really interested in retelling his story. We're interested in the rule of not being able to marry. And says God, the rule has two reasons, because they didn't offer food and water, and because they hired Bilam. Fine, end of discussion. Why does the Torah add pasuk number 6? V'lo avo Hashem elokecha lishma Bilam. And God did not listen to Bilam. Excuse me, just 1 second. Excuse me. I'm sorry. God did not listen to Bilam. And God changed the words from Bilam, which he wanted to curse the Jews, and it came out as a blessing, because Hashem loves you. I mean, that's very nice, but that's really not relevant to our passage. That's relevant to the story. That's relevant to the story when we're telling the narrative, but it's not relevant to this prohibition. This prohibition is about marriage. Why can there be no marriage? Because of the two reasons. Why does God have to add the last part of the story that in fact the curse was turned into a blessing? So the Dubno Magid, who I've quoted to you many times before, Rabbi Yaakov Krantz, he lived in the 19th century. He asked this question. And in the style of the Dubno Magid, he gives a parable to explain the answer. And the parable goes like this. There was once a fellow from a small village, and he went to the trade fair in the big town, and he loaded up his wagon with all kinds of goods and wares, and he was going to bring it back to sell. And the sale of this merchandise was going to sustain him for the next number of months, until the next time he would go to the big trade fair. This was his entire source of income over the next number of months. Okay, so he goes to the fair, he loads up with wares, spends all his money on the goods and the wares that he's going to bring back to sell, and then he comes home. And on the way home, he stays at an inn overnight. He stays at an inn, and the next morning he wakes up, and he goes to get his wagon with all of his wares. He goes to take his car out of the parking garage, and he sees that it's missing. The wagon is not there. The goods are not there. It's all gone. Everything is stolen, which means it's not only the loss of that, it means he has no source of income for the next however many months. He's in big, big trouble. All right. And by the way, minor problem, he also has no way home. So he starts walking home. Okay, it's going to take a few extra days. He starts walking home, and he's pretty sad. He's pretty sad. So he's walking home. He's going through the mountains and the valleys. And all of a sudden, he's walking through the forest. And he sees his wagon. And he sees his wares. And sitting next to the wagon fully loaded with his wares, he sees the ganef, he sees the thief. So he goes over to this fellow and he says, "You ganef, you thief, you stole all my stuff." And the thief says to him, "Yes, you're right. I did it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." So the man says to him, "You know what? Just give me back my wagon. Give me back my wares. I'll continue on my journey. We'll put it behind us." So the thief starts thinking to himself, says, this fellow, he says to himself, this fellow that I stole from, he's a pretty nice guy. He's a pretty easygoing guy. He didn't punch me. He didn't say he's going to call the police. Pretty easygoing. Maybe I can still get something out of this. So the thief thinks quickly to himself and he says, "Okay, you can have back your wagon. You can have back all of your wares. But don't you think you should give me a little something?" I said, "What? For stealing my stuff?" So he says, "Well, listen, I drove your wagon from the inn up the mountain and down the valley. It was hard work. And I got you, let's say it's halfway. Don't you think you should at least pay me for driving your cart and for taking care of your wares, bringing them at least halfway home? Isn't that worth something to you?" And the merchant says, "What chutzpah! Now I'm really upset with you. You think I owe you money because you stole my stuff? What chutzpah!" The Dubno Magid explains our passage in the same way. God says, Ammon and Moab, these two nations, they can never marry into the Jewish people. Ammon and Moab respond. And they say, "God, why are you being so harsh on us? Why are you being so difficult with us? Okay, when you wanted food and water, we didn't give it to you. Yes, it's true, we confess. And okay, we did hire Bilam to curse you. We confess. But Ammon and Moab say to God and to the Jewish people, you should really appreciate what we did. We did you a favor. Because in response to us hiring Bilam to try to curse you, Hashem, your God, turned it around into a blessing. The only reason you got the blessing was because of us. Don't you think you should show a little gratitude to us for being the reason that you get this blessing? Matovu Alecha Yaakov, we have it written over the top of our building till today. We wouldn't have that unless Bilam had tried to curse the Jews. Don't you think we are entitled to something? And God says, don't listen to them. It's not because of them that I bless the Jewish people. I bless the Jewish people because I love the Jewish people. I switched the words of Bilam's mouth from a curse to a blessing, not because Bilam, he had nothing to do with it. He's giving you a rationalization. It's tremendous chutzpah to claim that he should have some kind of recognition. He did not elicit the blessing. I gave you the blessing, God says, because I love you. And that's why that verse is added to this passage. I've shared with you before quotes from this marvelous novel, The Winners by Frederik Backman. And again, I urge you to read it. It's part of a trilogy. 3 amazing novels. One of them is The Winners by Frederik Backman. And he has a passage that reads as follows. When you're young, you believe that love is infatuation. But infatuation is simple. Any child can become infatuated, fall in love. But real love? Love is a job for an adult. Love demands a whole person, all the best of you, all the worst. It has nothing to do with romance. Because the hard part of a marriage isn't that I have to live seeing all your faults, but that you have to live with me seeing them. That I know everything about you now. Most people aren't brave enough to live without secrets. Humans will go to any lengths to hide their base motivations, to rationalize even the most base behavior. This lesson from the Dubno Magid always comes to us in this month, the month of Elul, as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, as we prepare to approach God and to be evaluated by God. And even if we try our hardest to rationalize our behavior with others, it just doesn't work with God. And so this week, the Parsha of Teitzei, when we review this lesson, this month, the month preparing for Rosh Hashanah, this is the time for honesty, for self-honesty. Hopefully, to be more genuine with others, but at the very least, to be more honest with ourselves before God. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.